The support class in League is commonly divided into two categories, Enchanter and Engage. Previously it used to be Enchanter and Tank in light of most Engage champions being Tank, but over the years a good number of non-tank champions were brought in that could fit the same criteria. What's interesting about this dichotomy is how widely recognized it is. Top lane, jungle, and mid usually consist of a melting pot of champions, therefore there's no formally acknowledged division of classes, you can play virtually anyone. But due to the bot lane featuring two players on both sides, a measure of consistency is required so as to ensure streamlined communication between random players. It would be difficult for the ADC to ascertain what they can and can't do if their support picks an assassin or juggernaut or another carry-oriented marksman. Vice versa, if your ADC picks a skirmisher or specialist or whoever, how are you as a support able to figure out what to pick and how to support them? Consequently, the bot lane and support roles have relatively lower class diversity than the solo roles, with the support in particular having the two established factions I mentioned earlier. A long-running debate in the support space is which one is truly the best archetype on a conceptual level. Meta shifts of course have the final say in which one is the dominant force, but I feel like in recent times the gap between them has never been this close. Both Engage and Enchanter supports are practically dead even in the scope of pick rate and success, so I thought a fun topic would be to compare the strengths and weaknesses of each group. Let's get into it. Suppose I should first get this out of the way. There's technically a third group of supports, colloquially termed carry supports. These champions tend to offer less utility and supportive benefit to their team to focus on personal damage. Players tend to have a love-hate relationship with carry supports. While certainly not unviable, their selfish nature and frequency of being picked by autofill players who don't know how to or don't want to play a more team-oriented role results in more volatility. Some carry supports do have remarkable synergy with ADCs, but in general they're a more rogue strategy. So for the purposes of this video, we're going to be focusing on just Engage and Enchanter supports. Being the more self-explanatory of the two, Enchanter supports constitute any champion belonging to the controller class, namely Enchanters. The textbook healer, priest, white mage, whatever you want to call it. Their primary goal is to provide buffs to their team, which can come in the form of direct augments, Lulu's Whimsy, Nami's Tight Color Blessing, Milio's Cozy Campfire, and the like, but most definitively you can identify an Enchanter support through their defensive utility, being able to apply shields and or heals to their team to increase their effective health and staying power, making them harder to kill, while simultaneously making them kill you harder. Buffs ultimately consist of artificial stats, attack speed, damage, movement speed, things of that nature, which may initially appear superfluous, but increases to one's skill pressure, transient as it may be, can often be the difference between winning or losing a fight, especially for ADCs. Lulu's bonus attack and movement speed can juice up her carry to get their auto attack off faster than the enemy carry, or they can speed them up to help them avoid a critical enemy attack like a hook from Thresh. Further expanding on that is the fact that enchanters can supply buffs that either cannot be obtained through items or would be inefficient to do so, particularly in the early game. Crit-focused marksmen seldom if ever buy a dedicated attack speed item first due to the absence of any attack damage to actually take advantage of it. Attack speed boosts like Lulu, Renata, and Yuumi can supplement their rate of fire for the time being, while still being effective later down the road, as most marksmen are focused on buying AD and crit-focused items like Infinity Edge, LDR, Immortal Shield Bow, and whatnot, with only one Zeal item and Berserker Greaves covering the attack speed department. Other buffs include things like tempo increases you find on Sona, Karma, Nami, and the like. On average, ADCs are one of the least mobile classes in the game, therefore any amps on their movement speed is appreciated in maintaining positional advantage. Some enchanters can even offer unique effects on their buffs. Nami's Tight Color Blessing can apply an on-hit slow to auto attacks and abilities, giving marksmen better stick potential. Milio's Cozy Campfire can increase your attack range by up to an additional 20%, enough to allow marksmen to comfortably outspace other marksmen depending on who, or even keep them further out of reach against melee dashes and whatnot. It's these buffs that make it the first and foremost selling point of the class. Enchanters can alleviate the gold or pressure disparity between their carry and the opposing carry if yours is behind. Conversely, if yours is ahead, the value of an enchanter's buffing capability gets amplified that much further, so if your team's a threat, enchanters can make you even more so. They excel at elevating their team's pressure ceiling by taking what they have and making it stronger or adding new things to reinforce their party's existing arsenal. In other words, enchanters are all about adding to your strength to either make up the difference between you and a stronger opponent, or extend your ceiling to essentially allow you to stat check your opponent. One key benefit of adding pressure is that theoretically there's no ceiling. If a champion's at 100%, you can increase it to 150, 180, 200. You can try to make it 1000% and they can get stronger and stronger. More buffs, more heals, more shields. There simply is no limit to how much a champion can receive. I mean sure, attack speed caps out and you can't exactly overheal your target, but the point is, if a team consisted of a Karma top, Ivern jungle, Seraphine mid, and Lulu support with a Kog'Maw ADC, you can just smash the crap out of shields, heals, and buffs on him, and they'll stack on top of each other with almost no diminishing returns. Because of this, Enchanter supports get progressively stronger as time goes on by virtue of their abilities having dynamic results compared to Engage supports whose abilities are more fixed in value. There are some notable downsides to this method of supporting, however, first of which being the absence of personal pressure. What I mean by that is enchanters can only ever amplify their party. They themselves have applicably no presence, and so anything that would warrant a role or rules to be fulfilled can't really be done so by the enchanter. An easy hypothetical would be frontlining. If your team consists of a Kayle top, Viego jungle, Lissandra mid, and Lucian ADC, you have plenty of teammates who would give you some dome for your buffs. But who wants to frontline? No one. You certainly can because you're about as tanky as a cannon minion. Who wants to engage? No one, not unless the Lissandra is goated and finds a good flank angle. Many enchanter supports have great teamfight crowd control abilities like Nami's Tidal Wave, Renata's Hostile Takeover, or Seraphine's Encore, but those are not meant for engage, they're meant for counter engage or follow-up engage. Throwing a raw Sona Crescendo in neutral demands that you're basically walking up to the enemy team, which makes it easy for them to nuke you for trying to do so. In essence, enchanters are not a standalone profile of stuff. They simply magnify the other 4 profiles on your team, so if your team is missing a role, whether engage or frontline or crowd control what have you, the enchanter can't exactly provide that for them. They are not the threat, they make their team more threatening. Second downside would be that enchanters, for the most part, can only ever support one person at a time. You might have an ability or two that affects the whole party, but obviously for balance purposes, the effects aren't as substantial as a single target buff. AoE buffs also tend to only come in the form of heals and shields. You don't really find an AoE attack speed buff since it would be incredibly difficult to find a middle ground between not overloading your team with an insurmountable stat advantage and giving enough stats for players to actually feel the difference. Enchanters might run into a scenario where they feel pressured to support 2 people at the same time despite not having the capacity to do so. This can be especially stressful when a teamfight begins to scatter. It takes a trained eye to know exactly who to dedicate your support to at what time. If an enchanter spends the whole game only supporting their marksman, that tends to be a sign of either an autofill or a really low skill support player, or the dual bot. Therefore, enchanters can be much harder to play at a high level, thus making them feel less impactful than they actually are. On that note, third downside is that not every player can appreciate what an enchanter does or provides, whereas it's much easier to understand the repercussions of what engage supports can do. Doubtless you've encountered a situation where your ADC is close to dying and they try to run away from the enemy champion. Unless the ADC is carefully tracking when their support shield is off cooldown, they might be too scared to continue the fight, causing you to miss your opportunity. On the other hand, if you see an Alistar use Pulverize, that's a very conspicuous green light to go on the offensive because the enemy is unable to do anything for 1 second. So not only does it take a heightened presence of mind to play an enchanter, it also takes a heightened presence of mind to play with an enchanter, whereas engagers are much more intuitive and easy to understand. Now that we've covered enchanters at length, let's talk about engagers, consisting of the Catcher, Vanguard, and to a lesser extent Warden class. As the name implies, engage supports are mainly supposed to get things started for the team, catching out opponents or initiating fights in the hopes of scoring a pick or winning a team fight. Most engagers have minimal utility they can offer to their team, choosing instead to focus on aspects like crowd control and physical protection such as body blocking. Being the ones who start confrontations, engagers do carry their own internal threat level, sometimes being the most threatening member of the team considering they're expected to be the first to attack, and with their naturally higher durability and even combat pressure, they can pose a threat with or without the assistance of their teammates, more so if your team's not absolutely certain they're alone. Despite being the more straightforward of the 2 archetypes, engagers are actually categorized into 2 subdivisions within their faction, Traditional Engage and Picks. Traditional Engage is a more conventional one. You have champions like Alistar, Leona, Maokai, Rel, Braum, and Rakan who, while they can technically play for picks, are much more effective in skirmishes and teamfights due to having either great resilience and or massive area coverage on their attacks. With the exception of Rakan, the other examples I gave can be just as resilient as a tank top or jungle, serving as a frontline base for your team and offering no shortage of crowd control. What they lack in damage, they make up for by making it easier for the rest of the team to deal damage. The value of crowd control stems from its ability to temporarily render the pressure of any champion to 0. It doesn't matter if they have 6 items and are 5 levels ahead of everyone else. While they're stunned or knocked up, they may as well have no items and be level 1. Therefore, a 5-man knockup by Rel or a 5-man Grand Entrance by Rakan can potentially be the most powerful force at that point in time, making the enemy team have to respect it even if they're ahead, since the moment of immobilization is enough to pose an immediate threat to even a fed champion's life. Pick-focused champions are more or less the same, only instead of attacking multiple members of the enemy team, they prefer to single out a mispositioned individual and focus all their attention onto them, that being champions like Blitzcrank, Thresh, Nautilus, Pyke, Tahm Kench, and Morgana. What makes their engage situationally more threatening is that not only do they crowd control you and set your pressure to 0, but they can do it for a longer time, or they can forcibly displace you from your current location, bringing you closer to danger, which also has the same property of isolating them from what would otherwise have been the rescue efforts of their team. If a Leona engages onto your team, your support or anyone near you can come to your aid and counter-engage, but if Blitzcrank hooks you, your team would have to pull a Saving Private Ryan and risk their own lives to extract you from that situation. Even if they're willing to do so, you may be already dead by the time they get there. Catchers are among the scariest champions in the game by virtue of their ability to instantly put you in a bad situation and without the recourse of your team reliably saving you. As an added bonus, most pick supports can be just as tanky for their team and serve as a frontline base, although their teamfight impact is understandably weaker. The focal point of engaged supports is, of course, found in their potential to influence the flow of the game. As the first champion's tactic gives the person playing them agency in getting stuff done, and more importantly, depending on how well they do so, they can additionally weaponize the threat of engage just as much as the actual engage itself. During the mid to late game, assuming the enemy team doesn't have Hyperfed Assassin, the support ironically is the most threatening member of the team since everyone knows the consequences of getting hooked by Blitzcrank or rooted by Morgana. It may as well be a death knell at that point. With crowd control being the X factor of League, you can functionally render any semblance of advantage a champion has to zero by chain stunning them or forcibly pulling them into a 1v5. Again, it doesn't matter if the enemy Caitlyn's full build and level 18 by 20 minutes. If she gets caught out by Nautilus and there's at least 1 or 2 other people next to him, she may as well have no items. Enchanters are unable to make that sort of play, at least not without overcommitting. As previously stated in the Enchanter section, it's also easier for the rest of your team to capitalize on the opportunities an engager can create. Most teams of the Catcher or Vanguard formulate their win condition around them. You hear it all the time whenever there's a Thresh or Blitz or Morgana. Play for picks, play for picks. Similarly, traditional engaged supports can also play for picks by using their crowd control on just one enemy. While heals, shields, and buffs are surely helpful for giving you confidence in challenging an opponent, it's not quite as reassuring as that opponent being unable to do anything, and this extends all the way to the highest tiers of Challenger. Most Challenger support players' best champions are playmaking ones. You'd be hard-pressed to find a support main who plays exclusively Enchanters. Maybe 1 out of every 5 or even 10. That's the extent of their influence in a game. But to be fair, engagers have their own flaws, chief among them being their more finite pressure range. While Enchanters are all about adding pressure to their team, engagers are all about subtracting pressure from the enemy team. Thing is, you can only subtract an enemy's pressure so much. Enchanters can multiply the strength of a teammate to the point where they're double or even triple the power of a single champion, giving them the wherewithal to literally 1v9 the game. Countless times throughout history, we've observed Enchanter supports juicing up a single champion to such an extent that it takes the combined efforts of all 5 members of the enemy team just to stop them. Hecarim with Yuumi, Master Yi with Taric, the classic Lulu Kog'Maw. There's a reason they're as devastating as people made them out to be. On the other hand, engagers might excel at temporarily negating a champion's pressure, but if they fail to neutralize them during that time, that pressure goes back to normal. There's also the potential issue of engagers having a much harder time escaping enemy offense in moments where they get engaged on. Enchanters can make use of their peel tools to protect their team, but if an engager wants to do the same thing, it usually mandates a sacrifice. Them. In addition, engagers tend to be more volatile. They're the ones who start fights. Naturally, they have to deal with the consequences of it. Or putting it simply, they have to evaluate the risk of an engage. Pick supports have to be careful not to accidentally hook the Rammus right into your jinx. Traditional engagers have to be able to discern between a game-winning play and hard inting. Comparatively, Soraka topping off your team or Lulu speeding up her ally doesn't have the same penalty if misused. So while engagers have the benefit of making plays to decide the course of the game, poor playmaking can backfire on them and have the undesired effect of turning a winning game into a losing one, especially if they lack the discipline to fight the Lee syndrome and take every opportunity they find. It's a fine line between being aggressive but not exposing yourself to unnecessary danger. Putting it together, which class does it the best? Obviously, it depends on circumstance, the composition of each team, the flow of the game, and whatnot. Engagers might enjoy Cloud Soul, while Enchanters enjoy Ocean Soul. Engagers do really well into Enchanter's early game, while Enchanters do well into Engager's late game. All depends on how the game unfolds. That being said, I do find that Engage supports, by nature of their proactivity, can take a support player further. Like I said, most Challenger supports have a playmaking-oriented champion pool. Not to say you can't make it with Enchanters, but empirically, playmaking wins more games. What do you guys think though? Which class do you think is stronger conceptually? Feel free to share in the comments. That's it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.